All right, welcome back. We are Comp 229 Web Application Development, Week 3, Part 3 of our video series, and we're talking about the Express Generator site structure this time around. So again, from a technical requirements perspective, you should have installed the Express Generator NPM package by now, as well as we've done some minor Express Generator site restructuring last time, which I'll go over with you again. You should also understand that the Express is a package that includes routing. We talked about that last time, but I think it's hard for people to get their minds wrapped around, as well as understanding how to use NodeMon just a little bit better. After this video, we're going to go over the parts of an Express Generator site, and at the end of this video, you should be more comfortable with how the Express Generator site is structured. That's what I'm hoping. Let's continue. So we're still going to use this week 3 part 2, even though it says week 3 part 3. We're going to still use the same folder as last time, just because there's no need for us to move on. Let's bring this up. So this is where we were last time. We did this hello world thing. But let me explain how this whole thing is structured. So this thing is broken down into 3 main folders: public, routes, and views, as well as our main manifest file, which is our app.js. We're going to start from there, app.js. Now you can see that there are several files in here. I'm just going to close this off for now. Several different files that we're linking to. These are all requires. Some of them are things that we have to load from a package perspective. We had to download some packages. One of them was the cookie parser package. Another one was Morgan, a logger, right? There's also the Express package we had to download. And the HTTP errors and path packages that are part of our default Node.js installation. And you can see this by going to the package.json file. Notice that there is cookie parser, debug, EJS, Express, HTTP errors, and Morgan. Those are all the packages that we've downloaded so far. Okay. So this is our manifest. Now I don't like vars. Vars is not a good thing to use in modern JavaScript. They do weird things with hoisting. So let's just Control F and find all var space and replace them all with lets. And that's what I recommend we do. You can see that there's 8 replacements we have to make. I'm going to click this little button here that's replace all, and it replaces, undo that. Let's try that again. Replaces all of our vars with lets, and I think that's the way to go. It's safer code. Okay, so that's the first thing we want to do here. Let's go over. So we've installed some packages. These are third-party packages. Installed third-party packages here. We've done that. I'm just going to pull this over for now. And we've also have a couple of other requires. So requires aren't just used for package installation or linking. These are linking the packages, the dependencies for our project to our manifest, which is our app.js. When I say manifest, I want you to think about it as the central file that links all the entire site structure together. I think this is the best way to call, kind of talk about this. We have 2 different routes that we use. One is, and we call them routers. One is for our main top-level site, this one, and another one for any users that we have. We don't have any users or authentication built into our site right now, so this one here is kind of useless. However, they build it in, they scaffold it in for us so that we can use it. The next one is we set up our app file. So app says, let's make a new Express application. That's what this does, and it instantiates or creates an instance of the Express application itself and stores a reference to it in the app variable. Then what we can do is we can use Express to set and use different parts or different features of Express. When we do app.set, we can set things like or configure views and the view engines. So again, you should have read a little bit about model view controller, but the way it's broken down is into 3 parts. The model is the way we connect to our logic. Our controller is the logic behind our routes, and our views are the things that we see that gets delivered to the user. So think about the views as our end pages, right? So our views, we use path.join, and path.join is a path itself is a built-in module for Node.js. And what we're saying is join to the regular path when we search. Instead of us searching for the views folder, we never have to reference the views folder here. We just have to, because it's part of our path, we can just assume that it's there. So it's going to search when our manifest looks to see or looks to find files that are inside of our views folder. It's another place that we're going to be able to search. That's what the join does. It joins views into our search path, right? And what I mean by search path is so that the application can find your view, all right? Not that you're going to be searching the view. It's the application itself. It needs to know about where your views folder is. And we're telling it. We're saying, hey, our views folder are inside the views folder. That's what we're saying, okay? We also specify or configure our view engine as EJS. That was that -e script. And we did an npm, we did a express -e. This express -e configured our view engine to EJS. That's that funky syntax, the directive syntax we saw when we went into the views folder into our index.ejs. This syntax here is only something that works with Express and EJS. Okay? Back to our app.js. So that's what this does, this view engine stuff here. The rest is a series of activations because what we do is we activate the logger so we can keep track of the dev system that we're logging. We're also using JSON for data exchange. That's what this does. So it looks for requests for that kind of content in our headers, right? And other things. We're going to go into these other ones later on. One thing also we do is we activate or we use a static route. So there's some dynamic stuff we can do, but we also have static routes. And what static routes mean is anything that's put inside of the public folder, that means up here in the public folder, it's automatically part of our path and it's a static route. I don't have to make individual routes for anything that's inside of this public folder. So if I want something that's going to be generally available to everybody, I put it in the public folder. And that's where you're going to see that I have a few things. I have images, JavaScripts, and style sheets. We need to manipulate these things and change the names because they're not great names. Let's do that now. Let's redo some stuff. I'm going to put in a new folder. So I'm clicking on the public folder and I'm going to make a new folder here. We're going to call it content. We're going to make another folder in the public folder. We're going to call this scripts. Okay, so content and scripts. We're also going to include another folder in this public folder. We're going to call it assets. So this is where all of our images are going to be in fonts and sounds and all that kind of stuff. Not right now, there's nothing inside here, but we're going to take our images folder and just drag and drop it into the assets folder. So now we have images or assets images. Okay. Notice that this is the syntax for Visual Studio Code. It kind of shows that image is empty, but it's inside the assets folder. All right, content is also empty, but we have a style sheet that's in here called style.css. We're going to take this style sheet and we're going to rename it and we're going to put it inside of our content folder. So let's just drag and drop it into the content folder. There we go, move it. We're going to change the name of this file. We're going to rename it to app.css, and we're going to take away this default styling because we don't want this default styling in here. We're going to put in a little comment that says custom CSS goes here. Okay, so that's what goes in there, and we're going to save it. Cool. Then what we're going to do is in JavaScript there isn't anything in there. We're just going to delete that folder altogether. And just to test our files, we're going to put inside the scripts folder a new file called app.js. Now this is different than this app.js, so please don't get confused because we're going to use the same name for different files, but just in different folders. So the way you would read this is public scripts app.js, not just app.js. And some other structures, they influence us or try and push us to use a fully qualified name, just like that. Content.scripts.app.js. That's what this thing should be called in some cases. I don't agree with that structure. I think it can be very confusing, so we're leaving it at app.js for now. In our app.js, let's make a little iffy. So we're going to put a little iffy, and if you're with me on comp 125, you know what an iffy is. It's an immediately invoked function expression If you're not familiar with this structure, it's okay. But it kind of looks like this. Okay, so that's kind of what it looks like. It looks weird. Don't fret. And we're just going to kind of scroll down in here, and we're going to put in a little function called start. And in our function start, we're going to have a little console command that's going to say app started. There we go. Also, we're going to have a window.onload, add event listener, the load command, and we're going to access start. So this is something you should be familiar with from JavaScript. We're adding an event listener to the window model, and then what's going to happen is when the window finishes loading, it's going to call the start function, and it's going to activate the console log that's going to say app started. Okay, this is on the client side. We haven't done much client side right now. I've been talking about the server side with Express. Okay, so that's what this is, but this isn't connected, and neither is this. App.css and app.js is not connected right now to our site. Let's get rid of style sheets. So we're getting rid of that. Delete. The way we connect these two files, our app.css and our app.js, is inside of our views. If we go to views and if we go to index.ejs, you can see it looks like a regular site. And indeed, we have this link here, link relative, the relation, which is a style sheet. We're looking at style sheets style.css, which no longer exists. So we have to change this so that it's going to say slash, again, it's going to be public, right? Actually, if I go back, we don't have to use public. We just have to look at, content, and we're going to call this app.css, because that's what we called it. And down in here, just below the body, or just above, we're going to put a script. And let's just use, we're going to temporarily change this type of file so that Visual Studio thinks it's an HTML file, so we can use emmet. So I'm going to go back to HTML. I'm going to type in the word script, so, source, and we're going to say, again, it's /scripts/app.js. That is the source of our scripts. Okay, we may have to change the pathing on these later on. I'm going to go back to EJS for this. So I'm going to just select EJS for the way the Visual Studio looks at this. I'm going to save this, and I'm going to make sure that everything's saved. And then what we should be able to do now is when we run this package, control backtick, and you can see that it's restarted a bunch of times. If I go back into our Express, and if I refresh, you can see now that the style is gone, because we removed the style sheet, right? And if I right-click and go inspect, and if I go to the console, we can see that app started. So that little app.js file is now linked into our site. This might be confusing for some of you. So how does this all work? Well, remember that my index.ejs is not an HTML file. It's something that we're going to use to compose into an HTML. Actually, what's going to happen is we're going to create an HTML file on the fly or dynamically through the EJS engine. That's what's happening right now. So our app.js, which is our manifest, is going through connecting up our views, and we're also using this static path to connect our public folder so that we can access it for things like CSS and scripts that are on the client side. Cool. Next, we have our couple more uses, activations. One of them is we're activating the slash for an index router and the slash users for the users router, which means these are two routes that are that by default are activated. So if I go back out to here, and if I go do something like a slash users, you can see now it says respond with a resource because it doesn't say just nothing. So there is a route that goes to the users route, but it doesn't really do anything right now. It's kind of a stub or a placeholder. That's what it is. To make sure that you understand how that works, let's take a look at the routes folder for 1 second. In the routes folder, we have two files, an index.js, which is for our top level routing, and our users.js for our anything to do with users. We don't have any users right now, but if you notice, for the slash, it does a response send, a respond with a resource. Let's just change this so that you can see what happens. We'll change it to placeholder. Okay, so that we can see that there's nothing there. If I go back out to users, then refresh, you can see now it's going to say placeholder. So that's where that is. That's where you get the users information. But in our routes index.js, what's actually happening in our index.js, it does something like, looks like this. It says, hey, let's install Express. Let's create a new router. And then what we can do is we can use the router.get methodology. And what get does, it says, hey, we're going to make a get request. When a get request comes into the root route, which is the main route, the slash means if I go to localhost :3000, or if you had a domain name like example.com, if you just went to example.com, this route would trigger. Remember, we talked about how Node.js is a reactive framework, or if you think about what that is, it's more of an event-driven framework. So this event, which is a route event, it will trigger whenever a user goes to the browser and goes to the main route. So, and then it says res.render. This is new. Res.render says, hey, render the page, create a page for us. Look inside of the index.ejs file inside the views folder. Remember, this is around the page that it's trying to render, the index template page. And by the way, we're going to pass into that page an object, that's what this is, with a property of title, and we're going to fill that property's value with the literal express. And this is how, if I go to my index.ejs, it's showing express popping up here. We're saying, hey, less than percent says anything that's inside the less than percent greater than, it's a directive. It's saying, hey, inject the title property of the object that's coming into this template right in here, into the title. Inject the title property into this h1 tag, as an example. And I can have other properties. For example, if I wanted to break this out so that there are many other properties, let's say, for example, I have a title and I also have an h1. I can create a new property, h1. And this property would be, main heading, let's say. Here's our main heading. So now I have two properties in my my object, and it's an anonymous object that we've created here. We can also make a class if you want to, or something else in here. But you have an anonymous object that has two properties, title and h1. And these two properties are the ones that we're passing into the template index.ejs. Let's take a look at that. And if I was to change this h1, instead of taking title property, if I change it to the h1 property, which is something that I've passed in, now if I press save, and if I go back out and I go back out to the main route, hopefully it's not going to give us this crazy error. So why did it give us this crazy error? Well, because we called it h1. That's the first thing. And let's take a look at that index. Let's make sure that everything is saved. Notice that there's one file that's not saved. So even though I made that change, it didn't get saved. Remember we talked about this? If it doesn't get saved, it doesn't activate in the router. So if I press save, now you can see that it's restarted. And if I go back out to here and refresh, hey, it says main heading now, not express. Why? Because we're passing in the h1 property as main heading, and we're injecting it right here inside of the h1 tag. We just called it h1. And if you don't like that, and if you want to be more explicit, let's do one more thing and then we'll stop recording this one. We'll call this main heading, if you want that one. If I was to save it, by the way, and do this, because it's expecting an h1 tag in there, now it'll error out. It'll give me an error that says, I don't know what you're trying to do here, but we don't know anything about an h1. We're looking, and we're also waiting for a main heading, and it's not here. So to make that fixed, we have to go here and put in main heading. And then when we save it, right, as an example, and go back out and refresh, you can see now that we're good to go again. So that's all I wanted to cover in this video. I know we had a lot that we went over on this one, a little bit longer than the other ones, but I wanted to go over a couple things. We talked about the site structure of Express and how we manipulated and changed the file and folder structure that we had here, so that makes more sense for us. Again, we're continuously evolving this as we get closer to what we want to do, which is create that 5-page site. That's it for me this time around, and I'll see you back in the next video when we finally restructure this and add some routes and create a 5-page site.